It's the first time we're meeting, so that's kind of exciting. All right. Good morning. We're going to call this meeting of the TRPA Transportation Committee to order. The date is Wednesday, December 13th, 2023, and it is 9:43 a.m. The first item on the agenda is a roll call to determine quorum. Maria?
Mr. Aguilar?
Sorry, here.
Mr. Friedrich?
Here.
Ms. Hayes? Here. Ms. Hill?
Here.
Mr. Honigman?
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right. I will now go over the remote and in-person meeting rules for the day. For the members of the public who are joining us remotely, to observe the meeting, go to trpa.gov under the calendar header, click on Governing Board Hybrid Meeting for December 13th, 2023. There you'll find a link to the public webinar hosted on Zoom. To address committee members directly with your comments, raise your hand in Zoom by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen at the appropriate agenda item. With your hand raised, you'll be unmuted by TRPA staff and have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you've used the dial-in number to join us by telephone, you can use *9 to raise your hand and be unmuted. For items that are unagendized as information only, we will hear public comment during the general public comment period at the end of the meeting. Comments on items agendized for action or possible action, we will hear public comment before the committee takes any action. To remote committee members, if you wish to speak, you can also raise your hand in Zoom. You'll find the hand icon at the bottom of your screen. Remote committee members may not use the chat box to make any comments or to have sidebar conversations. Please, everyone, remember to mute your mic unless speaking to cut down on background noise. Finally, I'd like to ask that all remote members turn on their cameras if they're able. Members of the public who have joined us in person, please use the sign-in sheets at the back of the room to indicate which item you're intended to comment on. At the appropriate time for public comment on an agenda item, please line up at the podium to speak. Committee members who are in person, please raise your hand if you wish to comment and speak clearly in the microphone in front of you. If you're viewing the webinar on a personal computer, please ensure that your microphone and speakers are turned off to prevent audio feedback into the room. All right, next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No.
Nope. All right, then we will deem the agenda approved as posted. All right, the next item is agenda item number 2, election of chair and vice chair. As a reminder to the public, after committee discussion on an item, you may raise your hand in person to be called on, or in the Zoom webinar to be unmuted by TRPA staff to share your comments. So for committee members, are there any questions, comments? I actually have a nomination, so this is bad as the dictator who's assumed authority. I would like to nominate as chair Alexis Hill and as vice chair John Friedrich. And do we have any other nominations?
I'd like to motion to approve. It's Cisco.
Great. I guess we have to go to public comment on this item. So if any member of the public wishes to address committee members on this agenda item, please raise your hand either now in person or by clicking on the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Anyone in the room? Seeing none. Anyone online?
Mr. Chair, there are no hands raised to comment on this item.
All right, great. Then we will close public comment. Any further comment, any comments from the committee? Nope.
Mr. Honigman, do you mind running the meeting until I get into the office? I am currently driving and should be there soon.
Sure, but that will just support the conspiracy theories of why I'm here. And
Thank you.
all right. All right. So let's see. Where are we? Let's see. We got a motion on the floor. So we have a motion to elect Alexis as chair and John Friedrich to serve as vice chair. Maria, do you want to do a roll call vote?
Mr. Aguilar?
Here.
Mr. Friedrich?
Yes.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Ms. Hill,
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Honigman,
Yes.
that motion passes.
Great, all right. So now we're on to agenda item number 3, the TRPA Transportation Overview. Information can be found on page 641 of your packet. As a reminder to the public, since this is an informational item, we will only hear comments during the final comment period. So I'm going to pass this off to Nick Haven and Michelle Glickert to present.
Mr. Acting Chair, I'm going to kick this off and then do the same, pass this to Nick Haven and to Michelle Glickert, our transportation experts in the room. I'm Julie Reagan, TRPA's Executive Director. I just wanted to welcome this committee. This is the inaugural meeting of a new committee of the board. We haven't chartered a new committee in some time, and transportation has always been a part of the overall environmental improvement program. But a huge part, and so weighty that it was really sucking all the oxygen out of the room of the EIP committee. So we said, let's just form an independent committee that can focus exclusively on transportation. So I'm really pleased to just provide some overview comments, and then we'll get in. We have several items on the agenda. I will note, just from a timing standpoint, we have a little more flexibility with time because one of the main agenda items on the Regional Planning Committee is getting pushed into January. So if we go over our hour, that's okay. It gives us a little bit of a cushion because we have a lot of topics to cover today. So just in terms of framing up what you'll hear from our team, transportation is a large topic. It is complicated. It's probably one of the most complex projects and programs that we work on at TRPA. So I wanted to orient particularly some newer members of the board and of the committee of how transportation works at Tahoe. It's always been a huge challenge. We're a rural place. I like to say Tahoe is a small town on the weekdays and a big city on the weekends when you look at the swell of volume of being a drive-up tourism market. So that's a huge challenge when you go from less than 60,000 people in the basin to, on an annual basis, could be up to 15 million people and 10 million cars that come into the basin in a rural roadway network that is constrained by the compact, the bi-state compact that chartered TRPA, that chartered the Tahoe Transportation District, basically gives us a policy mandate to reduce dependency on the private automobile. That's very unique in America. And we've been working on that, but it is very difficult to get people out of their cars and to get the funding that we need to build a world-class transportation system. Because quite frankly, our transportation system isn't even up to, first world standards. We're more in the third world category. So we have a lot of work to do. We have a $5 billion annual economy that is driven by tourism, that relies on a good experience. And when people are sitting in their cars for hours in Tahoe stuck, that's not a good experience for our visitors, for our locals who need to get back and forth to medical appointments, to the grocery store. We've had some real choke points in recent years and some pressure points on the system. But we're not choked every day of the year. We don't have a 365-day-a-year problem with transportation. It's very peak driven. And so we find that there are solutions that we can deploy to address that. And the other thing I'll note is that transportation affects quality of life in every household in America. But what's different in Tahoe is that it affects our lake. And so what happens on the land affects the water. The roadways act like conveyor belts to deposit runoff and sediment into the lake, and also the decomposition of the roads themselves and the tires create particles that run into the lake. And so we have water quality impacts, we have air quality impacts, we have greenhouse gas issues that we're trying to solve with transportation. We have safety issues. I've heard from many members of the board, there are very deep concerns about safety on our corridors. You heard a presentation about the trends away from concentrating visitation in the casino core where there's parking to visitation on our corridors where there's really limited parking. And it's no surprise that we're having a crisis right now. So that's something that we have to work on. We also have to look at issues of mobility and multimodal and understanding that not everyone has a car at Lake Tahoe. We know from our equity study in transportation that 1,000 households in the basin do not have a car to get to work. So these are huge challenges. I want to understand or want to have you understand a little more about the role of an MPO. And some of you are very familiar with that, and others may not be. You know, in America, you need a population of about 50,000 to qualify as an MPO. Tahoe does not have one single jurisdiction that has that number. So we were able, through Senator Reed's office and his key staffer, Bob Herbert, who passed away a few years ago, to have Tahoe have a special dispensation to be an MPO, to roll up all the populations across the state line so that we had qualification to be an MPO, and therefore we are just one of the very smallest MPOs in the country. And so we don't have the same amount of funding that big cities get. We were able to up that formula, it's called, for population, which is how money flows from the feds to their respective jurisdictions, so that there is some recognition of tourism in our population number. We're now recognized at the federal level for over 200,000 population. It takes into account some of our visitation. We're working to get the state of California to recognize that. That would free up some more funding. But it's a big challenge that we just don't have that year-round population, and we don't have that commuter-based traffic pattern that is more typical of how funding is passed through to MPOs across the country, metropolitan planning organizations. So Tahoe, as always, is a little unique, but transportation has been at the forefront of our communities. It's something I heard in every single meeting that I held in the community and with our staff. We have hit a fever pitch, and we need to act. So welcome, and thank you all for taking the time to serve on this committee. It's going to be a very busy committee. We're going to make it interesting and meaningful for you. Funding is a key objective that we're going to be talking about. And I do want to note, before I turn it over to Nick and Michelle, I mentioned the equity study that we have presented to you in the past. We were really, really proud to be the recipient of the Rosa Parks Diversity Leadership Award through the Women in Transportation chapter of Sacramento's Society for Transportation. So that's a big award that recognizes the work that we're doing to look at the equity aspects of transportation here in the basin. So really proud of our team for that accomplishment. And with that, I'll turn it over to Nick.
Thank you, Julie. Good morning, everyone. Nick Haven. I am the MPO director for the transportation program here at TRPA, and been here quite a while, actually from the genesis of the MPO back in 1998, quite a while. But it's been great, and I'm glad that this committee is formed because it gives us an opportunity to partner with a subset of the board to really dive into some topics that, you know, are important, obviously, and are a priority for the region right now and into the future. So we have some exciting stuff to share. We're not going to try and overwhelm you too much because, as Julie said, it's a pretty daunting topic, but we're going to ease you into it and really want to hear from you in terms of what you're interested in and how we can advance, you know, policy and projects and funding together. So look forward to working with you. I'm going to go ahead and give a quick overview of kind of TRPA's role in transportation, because there are a lot of partners that do transportation in the basin, and TRPA has kind of more of an overarching venue for transportation with its authorities as the Metropolitan Planning Organization, as Julie said. We have some other authorities through the compact that really direct us to, as Julie said, reduce dependency on the automobile and also create a regional transportation plan and vision. And then we have another authority, so we have basically three through the state of California that is a regional transportation planning agency. So with those authorities comes some responsibilities to do certain things regarding long-range transportation planning, funding administration and distribution, project selection, and things like that. So, so the venue that TRPA creates, we really try to stitch together a transportation vision that is representative of not only regional goals and where we're headed in transportation for the long term, but also bringing in local priorities, local governments, state DOTs. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen in transportation. And so it's TRPA's responsibility to kind of bring that partnership together and produce kind of a cohesive, understandable vision for the future for transportation. And we do that through the regional transportation plan. That's where that lives and is articulated. And that's one of the core documents of TRPA and the MPO responsibility. We also coordinate kind of project alignment and trying to integrate how we meet that vision. How do projects come online? What projects are selected for funding? And we do that through also funding allocations and how we track that. And that's through our Federal Transportation Improvement Program, which is a very more near-term accounting of projects and funding, about 5-year term. So we have a bunch of tools that we use to clearly document and articulate where we're headed in transportation that kind of keeps the partnership rolling and in alignment. We also do data monitoring and tracking of projects. So looking at project effectiveness. Are we meeting our goals? Are we moving toward our goals? Similar to environmental thresholds, we do similar things in transportation. How is transit ridership going? How are our roadway congestion looking? And that informs and circles back to our planning. I'll go into a slide next that kind of illustrates that a little better, because it's not a bright line. There's a lot of partners doing similar things, which is good if we're communicating in alignment. Next slide. And so I know this is going to be hard to read, but think of this as kind of a spectrum from left to right in terms of the long range planning of the RTP and setting that vision and course. And the blue is TRPA's role, and the green is like all of our partners, the Tahoe Transportation District, local governments, state DOTs, all those partners that deliver transportation improvements. And it's a shared responsibility to kind of move through this spectrum where we're looking at establishing that vision with input from the public and all of our partners. We document that in the regional transportation plan, and then we dive a little deeper and do corridor planning. Tahoe's a pretty unique environment and has some definitely different segments around the lake. We have some heavy recreation corridors like on 28, Highway 89 around Emerald Bay. And then we have what we call our urban centers, you know, on the north and south ends of the lake, where it's a very different characteristic. And we have instituted corridor planning, working with Tahoe Transportation District to really dive a little deeper and work more deliberately with that vast partnership that exists in those corridors. And then we get into project selection and the sequencing and the movement of projects. You start to transition from long range planning into actually delivering projects and improvements. And that's where project selection prioritization comes in. And that's again a partner effort that we work with the Tahoe Transportation Implementation Committee, which is a committee made up of more technical staff of all the local governments and the state DOTs, where we can really work on that prioritization with those practitioners. And then we document that in the FTIP, that Transportation Improvement Program, that clearly shows to the public, to our partners, how projects are advancing. And then you start to really click into project level planning and development, where you're talking about engineering studies, design, that still has a partnership component to it, because Highway 28 is a good example. You know, projects definitely impact other partners and other projects, and they bump up against each other, and they need to be considerate of different elements. And so that's why the partnership is so critical and so strong on project development. And so when we get to project implementation, TRPA's role is a little less. And yes, we approve projects, our regulatory role. We're also approving some of those projects, but we're brought in all along the way. And so those projects are really driving towards our goals. And then when projects are delivered, we kind of circle back with that effectiveness and monitoring. And so it's a true cycle that progresses and then informs our long range planning and even some of the projects. And so I just wanted to illustrate kind of that cycle and framework of our transportation program. And so that's probably good for now. We're gonna cover a lot more, and like I said, you know, we're not gonna try and throw too much at you today. However, we would like to be able to present our items with a lot more context, because there is a lot of kind of administrative type actions that this committee will be taking. You'll see a couple later, but I just want to kind of put it into context in terms of, you know, those decisions and how we arrive at those recommendations for you are really housed in this framework. So I just want to kind of illustrate that for you. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle. She's going to talk a little bit more about the planning framework and some upcoming items that you'll see. So thanks.
Did you want to ask a question, John?
Yeah, I may just ask it now. So what do you envision as the role of this committee in helping to, on the TRPA side of the ledger there, the planning, the regional vision goals and strategies in informing, not like just the administrative actions or approving things, but helping inform and deliberate on that vision?
Yeah, great question. I think Michelle will actually touch on a lot of those because we're into a transportation plan update cycle. So your feedback on our strategies and our goals around transportation it's perfect timing actually to help shape that. And then from a project standpoint, you know, we will be keeping you updated on funding releases, looking for your support in actually seeking funding. And then also corridors, giving you updates on corridors and the progress we're making actually on the ground. Because I think, you know, sometimes planning can be a little boring if you're stuck in planning only. We want to show you the results of that planning and bring in partners to show progress and just show successes.
Add to that a little bit. I don't know. I don't think planning's as boring as Nick does, but John Hester for the record. Kind of like, maybe this will help John, is kind of like the regional planning committee, or what was our pick, looks at regional plan amendments and code amendments. We're looking at you all to be the primary committee that goes through the regional transportation plan, sustainable community strategy update process. You're the group we're going to be bouncing a lot of that off of.
Yep, and one more pile on, Julie Reagan, and I will remind the committee, and I'll do the same in the full board meeting, just because we do expect a lot of people on Zoom today. When you ask a question, if you could just identify the seat you hold on the board and your name, that would be helpful for the Zoom participants. But again, Julie Reagan, TRPA Director. I would add, Member Friedrich, like, we really view this committee as a partner to be a bridge with the community and to get your constituencies engaged more in transportation and for funding. You know, I think it's no surprise that Member Hayes is on this committee, who has a lot of relationships in Washington in her experience, and there is a lot of infrastructure money that we are starting to see come to Lake Tahoe, but we have a lot more potential. So really helping us fine tune our strategies for getting funding, which is a big part of the need for Tahoe.
Okay, we'll keep rolling here. Thank you. Michelle Glickert, Transportation Planning Program Manager. I'm going to pick a new title and call it Transportation Exciting Planning Program Manager. This diagram helps illustrate a lot of what we do on the planning side and how we keep Tahoe moving. We'll be using this again, as Nick is saying, we want to brief you and kind of bring you along. There's a lot going on in transportation planning. So we'll probably use this diagram a little bit more throughout the year to help us illustrate for you, you know, the items we'll be bringing forward for your consideration. The RTP is the big blue circle there in the middle. It's the center of it all. And the RTP is the transportation element of our regional plan. So the RTP contains regional goals and policies, a funding plan, a 20-year vision, and a project list. That project list is developed through all of our other planning work on these plans that sort of circle the RTP here on the diagram. And there's also programs that all feed into the RTP. At the top there is the active transportation plan, which seeks to improve our non-auto transportation network so that everyone feels comfortable. They get out of their car, bike, walk, scoot, roll, and whatever comes next in the next 20 years. Travel demand management, also known as TDM, is a program that we have in transportation planning, and that really is a partnership. We provide information through different venues where we're seeking to get transportation information out to everyone. But we also utilize our transportation management associations on our North and South Shore. And those folks have a lot of, their committee members are large employers. So those are ski resorts, colleges, hospitals. And so with the TMA support, they help incentivize employees to take transit, bike, walk, carpool instead of driving solo. So we have a partnership with them as well. And on the lower right there, transit planning, a little different shade, because everything that we do in transportation planning isn't always done by us. Sometimes it's a collaboration, especially with transit. It's showing there a couple of the transit operators. On our North Shore, we have the Truckee Tahoe area regional transit, that's TART, and also Tahoe Transportation District on the South Shore. So with them, they'll be developing short-range transit plans, and even TTD looking at bringing together a longer-range vision, all of which feed into the regional transportation plan. Right now, very timely on all of that work. And then that third one is the South Shore TMA, who's operating Lake Link right now, which is the South Shore kind of micro transit. So a lot of partnerships are involved in transit planning. Technology is almost another one of those overarching plans that we have. It's woven into just about everything we do, and the success of our programs and the transportation network rely on technology. This year, we'll be updating our EV readiness plan for that technology kind of element. In performance planning, Nick talked a little bit about that. That's how we really monitor and analyze the effectiveness of achieving our regional goals. We've highlighted safety there as a focus area this year for, really working towards helping our vulnerable users and identifying priority areas for improvements. The last one there over on the left and at the top is corridor planning. And he mentioned that a bit too, where the focus most recently has been in our recreation corridors, 28 and 89. And this is where the complete streets concept comes into play. Really, all of those other circles, transit and active transportation options, working together with paid parking to incentivize non-auto travel is sort of how we do planning in under that one. And then, of course, off to the left is those overarching plans that we have, the public participation plan and transportation equity. The public participation plan lays out the details on how we'll conduct our outreach for all of that planning work I just mentioned. And it also, it's sort of an overlay on an equity, forgive me, the second one there, transportation equity, is also an overlay into how we conduct our outreach, who we are outreaching to. It's also woven into project selection, plans, and the funding decisions that we make. Next slide. So a little early on the agenda, but important, is the upcoming topics. And I wanted to provide this because while all of that planning work and that overview is fresh in your mind, in February, we're going to be bringing forward the Vision Zero safety strategy. And then to follow in March, we'll have an update to our active transportation plan. We'll likely then also have a federal transportation improvement amendment. And then part of that performance category I mentioned, a biennial transportation performance report. So you guys definitely will be rolling up your sleeves and helping us through all of that. And then late in April and May, we'll be providing some brief updates on the recreation corridor work we've been talking about. And with the public participation plan, we'll kick off our next regional transportation plan. And so lastly, a part of this committee and one of those administrative roles is the overall work program that lays out all of the work for the TRPA transportation planning and improvement teams for the next fiscal year, which will be primarily, as one might imagine, focused on development of the next RTP and accelerating implementation of transportation projects. So with that, that concludes the overview, and we are ready to answer any committee comments and questions.
Great, thank you. Any comments, questions? Anyone? John?
Thanks, Michelle. I agree, exciting. And lots of different elements and balls in the air, as you multicolor balls in the circle. So in those items coming back, I guess this relates to my previous question, where do you see as opportunities for the committee to get involved in kind of what goes into the plans in the first place, as opposed to saying, here it is, fully baked, now please vote, right? I mean, is there kind of where, you know, are there opportunities for us to get involved kind of in the formation as the cake is being baked?
I mean, with our planning process right now, it is a little bit down the road, but we do work with each of your agency's staff. So in the active transportation plan, that'll be coming forward. Right now, we're having meetings with a lot of the public works groups to look at those project lists, to talk about maybe new policies, new directions that we want to head. So a lot of it is kind of being laid out right now. With the safety strategy, sort of the same thing. We've been working those two for the last year. But the regional transportation plan is the ripe and timing is right there for you to help us develop that. You know, those plans I mentioned do feed into it, but ultimately the regional transportation plan is really where they all kind of come together. So that's kind of, Nick, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think there's also, you know, all of these planning efforts are informed by a lot of the policy discussions, you know, and we're trying to balance between not having you review, you know, pages and pages of volumes of text that's written like a draft chapter or something, but rather try and zero in on some of those policy decisions that can help guide that text and the front end. And so a lot of these documents are actually building from previous governing board discussions, EIP committee discussions, and we continue to kind of keep that cycle going. The RTP is a good example where I think there's some key policy decisions that we have to bring forward, you know, not as a chapter written, but as, you know, a discussion with this committee. Yeah.
I'll build on that. Julie Reagan, TRPA director for the record. And I think because this is a new committee, like we have an opportunity to envision how we want to engage with you to be effective, meaningful. Maybe we sponsor a workshop, you know, where in my experience in talking about transportation, as exciting as the planning is, people really like to talk about projects and what projects are we going to fund and what projects make it into the project lists and costs and how we prioritize. So we will come back to you at the next meeting, you know, looking at the year with there are some must-dos of this committee. Like there are millions of dollars. We have, you know, just kind of big picturing it, you know, a $2.5 billion regional transportation plan over 25 years. That's what we call the constrained project list. So those are the ones we have foreseeable funding for. You know, there's another billion of what is called in transportation speak unconstrained, and that's money we really have no idea how we're going to find. And all of that gets updated as part of the regional transportation plan. So we'd love to maybe do some workshops, potentially, particularly in light of the fact that our new chair, Member Hill, is also the chair of the Transportation District. We could do some joint meetings perhaps with the TTD board because that organization is more focused on implementation, but the partnership is critical. So I think we're open to the committee's ideas, but we'll come back to you with some examples of how we can use your time effectively.
Any other comments? Anyone online?
Yes, thank you. I really like what Vice Chair Friedrich brought up because what we did at TTD is each one of our committees created goals for ourselves. And so I think there's an opportunity, like Julie said, to do that in maybe more of a workshop format, because I do think this committee needs to have goals. And the other thought, and Michelle, this wasn't part of your schedule for upcoming discussions, but the TTD will be discussing our short range transit plan and kind of how we're going to implement a 5-year both project and transportation plan. And I think that needs to also come to this committee, so this committee knows what's going on with that. And I think there's a lot more opportunities for us to ensure that TRPA knows what TTD is doing. So figuring out those updates would be really great.
Thank you, Commissioner Hill. I'll definitely add that to the list.
Great. Anyone else online? Okay. All right, then, if no one else has any other comments, we'll move on with the agenda. Since that was for informational purposes only. So next up, we're on agenda item number 4, recommend.
Vince, sorry.
Oh,
Public comment?
we don't have that
Oh,
till
we
the end.
Oh, forget it.
Yeah,
You're on.
because-
I'll be quiet.
yeah. I know it's confusing to me, but I get a sheet that tells me exactly what to say. So, um, we're now on agenda item number 4, recommended adoption of the 2024 Regional Transportation Improvement Program, the RTIP. Information can be found on page 205 of your packet. And again, we're going to pass this to Nick to present.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr. Acting Chair. So this is one of those administrative items that we do every 2 years. And this is funding that comes through the state of California. It's called Regional Improvement Program funding. And I wanted to illustrate here the relationship between kind of the Caltrans state apparatus in terms of how funding flows to regions. We have a share of the State Transportation Improvement Program funding. We get it's basically that's made up of 75% regional funding and 25% what they call interregional funding that Caltrans can use. And so all the regions across the state, TRPA, this is our Regional Transportation Planning Agency Authority hat in the state of California. All regions of California basically get a allocation from the state. And we are required to produce this Regional Transportation Improvement Program that shows how we're going to use that funding. And so we have prepared that for the 2024 cycle. You can go to the next slide. And so our allocation, we're still actually paying off in advance. So it's actually kind of exciting because we're in the positive. We've actually taken an advance about 8 years ago to fully fund some Kings Beach commercial core improvements. And that loan, so to speak, is being paid off by our future shares. And we finally paid off the last $636,000 of that. So that's exciting. We're going to be in the positive. But that only leaves us with 1.2 million. And this program requires you to fully fund a project or a phase of work. And that's not enough money to do that right now. And so we're proposing to roll that money over. We don't lose it, but it gives us the opportunity to couple it with other funding and to our next share allocation, next 2 years, to have a more substantial amount of funding that we can actually attribute to a project. And so what we are asking for today, though, is to program on the far right circled is what's called our PPM funding, which is planning, programming, and monitoring. So that funding actually goes to TRPA in order to administer not only project tracking and funding tracking, like we've been talking about in this document and our broader FTIP. And so that's pretty critical funding that we've actually never tapped before. And it goes into the overall work program and into the TRPA budget to support some of my time and Judy Weber's time on staff who works on this work in terms of tracking projects and funding. It's a lot of accounting work and tracking, a lot of work with our partners. And so today's action, we're going to be asking you to approve a resolution approving the RTIP that is essentially approving this programming of this $165,000. And unfortunately, that's over 5 years. So it's really only about $33,000 a year, but it's definitely helpful for our budget. So next page. So this is just showing the actions and what we do following governing board adoption. So this is a recommendation to the governing board to approve. It will be on the consent calendar for TRPA. And then we submit that to Caltrans and the California Transportation Commission that then folds into the overall state transportation improvement program. And then we will be including that, as I said, into the overall work plan budget next fiscal year. That is all I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Any questions from committee members? Seeing none in the room, anyone online? Hearing none, then I guess we'll go to public comment on this item. If any member of the public wishes to address the Transportation Committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand either now by clicking raise hand at the bottom of your Zoom screen or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Anyone in the room? Don't see any. Anyone online?
Mr. Chair, we have one hand raised so far.
Okay.
Pamela Sigdinos, if you unmute, you
Great.
can address the committee.
Yes, good morning. I'd like to understand, based on what you've just outlined here, what role this committee will have in taking on the elephant in the room, which is the biggest transportation challenge in the Tahoe Basin, and that is how to get people out of the basin in the event of an emergency. And I'd like to understand better from the committee how that charter will be incorporated into this particular set of individuals. And also, I want to just make a very basic statement. There seems to be a real love with this notion of creating as many paths as possible. I'll tell you a little story. 2 days ago, I decided to go for a walk. The roads around here were a sheet of ice. If I had attempted to walk, it would have potentially put me in jeopardy. So I'd like to understand how you can look at reality-based planning in the sense that several months of the year, up to 6, this place and the paths are coated in ice and snow. How does that factor into your transportation multimodal planning? Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. Anyone else? Online?
Mr. Chair, there are no other hands raised to comment.
Okay, great. Then we'll close public comment. Any comments from the committee or staff?
Mr. Acting Chair, I'll jump
sure.
in, Julie Reagan, since we only had one question in public comment. I'll do my best to address that. And I think we'll continue to evolve our discussions around fire evacuation later in the day, and also through other committee work. The Environmental Improvement Program will be having a series of briefings on forest health and the work of the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team and the fire chiefs and all the law enforcement partners that we have. And certainly we'll be looking at in various aspects through the regional transportation planning process and safety. And then in terms of year-round access to paths, that is something that our agency, working with the community, have been working on for a number of years, to have pathways be plowed in the winter, because again, we have a lot of people that don't have access to a private automobile to get to work. And local jurisdictions are doing a great job. It's really expensive. So it's something that we're looking at as we've attacked that through our overall bike and pedestrian plan through active transportation. But it's a goal that we share, to have the pathways accessible and open year round. That is our goal. It's just going to be costly.
Great, thank you, Julie. Any other comments, questions? All right, then if there's no further comments, I'll entertain a motion on this item. In order for the motion to pass, an affirmative vote of a majority of the quorum is required. Is all. Do I hear a motion from anyone?
So moved.
Great. And should I read that motion? Okay. I saw John going for his mic, which I knew what that was about. The motion is to recommend that the TRPA Governing Board adopt Attachment A Resolution 2023 approving the 2024 Regional Transportation Improvement Program. All right. Any comments on that? Then I guess we'll turn it over to Maria for a roll call vote.
Mr. Friedrich,
Aye.
Mr. Aguilar,
Yes.
Ms. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Honigman.
Yes.
That motion passes, Mr. Honigman.
Great, thank you. All right, now we are on to agenda item number 4, recommended approval of the FY 2023-2024 State of Good Repair Project list for the Tahoe Transportation District, TTD, and Tahoe Truckee Area Rapid Transit, TART, and authorize the allocation of FY 2023-2024 Transportation Development Act funding for TTD and TART and TRPA. Information can be found on page 235 of your packet. Now I'd like to pass it to Kira Richardson to present.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kira Richardson. I am a senior transportation planner with TRPA, and I'll be presenting on the approval of Transportation Development Act funds to TRPA for administrative purposes and to TTD and TART for transit capital and operations expenses. The TRPA governing board annually approves these allocations, and previously we brought these forward through the Operations and Governance Committee. And I'm not sure how familiar you all are with this program, so I'm going to provide a little bit of background on it before you take action. Next slide, please. So the Transportation Development Act was established in California in 1971 to provide funding for transit capital and operations. There are currently 3 different fund sources available to transit operators under this act, and the funding and other program elements are administered in California by regional transportation planning agencies, which is TRPA for the Lake Tahoe region. So TRPA receives the allocation amounts from the state and the 2 counties, El Dorado County and Placer County. And then we use a formula that has been previously agreed upon by the operators to calculate the splits between the 2 eligible transit operators. And our formula considers the population of each operator's primary service area, prior year ridership on each transit system, and the amount of service that the operator actually provided in the prior year. Next slide. So the 3 different sources of funds administered through the Transportation Development Act are listed here. First is the local transportation fund. These funds are derived from a 1/4 cent general sales tax within each county and then returned to that county where they were generated. State transit assistance funds are derived from a statewide sales tax on gasoline and distributed to areas based on a formula that considers population and operator revenues. And then the final source is the State of Good Repair, which provides funding through the Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017. Next slide. So here is a breakdown of the allocations for the last 5 fiscal years, just to give you an idea of what the amount of funding that we see through this program, and then including the allocations for fiscal year 2024. So you'll notice that there are some fluctuations in funding for the LTF and STA sources, and that's primarily due to countywide and statewide fluctuations in gasoline purchases and sales taxes. And then the State of Good Repair funding is pretty steady every year. Next slide. And here's that breakdown, again, just in a different format, so you can kind of see the trends over the last 5 years. So we are seeing a decrease in LTF funding from the last fiscal year for both TTD and TART, but the other 2 fund sources have remained relatively stable for our region. Next slide. So another part of approving TDA funding specifically for the State of Good Repair funding is to approve the State of Good Repair project list. So each year, TTD and TART must submit the project lists to the state and to TRPA for approval prior to receiving SGR funding. And this is a relatively small amount of funding for our region, so the project lists are limited, but the State of Good Repair funding is will be used for fleet maintenance and to support the purchase of new vehicles, as you'll see here. So next slide. So with that, these are the final TDA allocations for fiscal year 2023 and 24. Each fund source has its own resolution, and then there's also an additional resolution approving the State of Good Repair project lists. And I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Great, thank you. Any questions from committee members? John.
I'll get better this time. Julie, John Friedrich for the record. So on the LRF funds, those aren't programmed yet, right? I know there's discussions about use of those funds in the coming year. I'm just And there is some flexibility in how those are going to be expended in the 23-24 budget year.
Yes, so right now we understand that the Tahoe Transportation District is in conversations with city and the South Tahoe Transportation Management Association to potentially allocate a portion of their funding to support the expansion of microtransit on the South Shore. And that can still happen as soon as these funds are allocated to the Tahoe Transportation District. We could amend the application, the claim application that TTD submits. But this is a procedural step that we can't really wait on because the board has to approve this funding before the states can pay the operators. So we have to do it around this time.
Great. I know that's my understanding of the process. Just wanted for the record to know that that was, there's that flexibility and the conversations going on and nothing is kind of set in stone, right? And that's, and that shift can be made. So, and again, John Friedrich for the record.
Yes, you're correct.
All right, any other questions from committee members? Anyone online? All right, then we'll open it up to public comment on this item. If any member of the public wishes to address the Transportation Committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Anyone in the room? Anyone online?
Mr. Chair, we have one hand raised online.
Okay.
Ann Nichols, if you unmute, you can address the committee. Ann, I can see you're unmuted, but we are not hearing you. And maybe double check that you have the correct microphone selected in your audio settings. Mr. Chair, Ann lowered her hand.
Okay, maybe if you can get that figured out, you can comment at the end of, in the general public comment, that would be great. All right, so no other people raised hands? No other public comment?
No, their hands are raised to comment.
Okay, great. All right, we'll close public comment and then I'll entertain a motion on this item. John?
Move that we recommend, John Friedrich for the record. Move that we recommend approval of the FY 2023-2024 State of Good Repair project list for the Tahoe Transportation District, TTD, and Tahoe Truckee Area Regional Transit TART, and authorize the allocation of fiscal year 23-24 Transportation Development Act funding for TTD, TART, and TRPA.
Okay, great. Any comments or discussion from the committee? Seeing and hearing none, we'll go to a roll call vote. Mario?
Mr. Aguilar,
Yes.
Mr. Friedrich,
Yes.
Ms. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Honigman.
Yes.
Motion passes, Mr. Honigman.
Great, thank you very much. All right, so now we're on to agenda item number 6, recommend approval to allocate fiscal year 2023-2024 California Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program and Zero Emission Transit Capital Program funding. Information can be found on page 251 of your packet. So again, we'll pass it to Nick Haven to present.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, so here's another funding allocation. It's exciting. We're talking a lot about transit today, and transit is probably the most underfunded mode in our regional transportation plan. So these funds are definitely critical to advancing our goals in transit. So the state of California, through appropriation from the California Budget Act of 2023, so really very recently, approved some emergency funding for the state of California's transit operators. Post-COVID transit across the country really has really suffered. A lot of transit agencies are facing some very hard decisions around providing transit service, ridership declines, other things. And this funding was intended to really buoy up a lot of the transit operators in the state of California and hopefully restore ridership by maintaining services and looking at even new services and looking at electrification. And so there's two components to this funding. There's the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, which is actually a program that's existed in the state of California. The Tahoe Transportation District had put a previous application in for that competitive program. They looked that unfortunately that was not funded, but they're looking to going back to that program for a more comprehensive ask for the region around transit. And so the Lake Tahoe region for this fiscal year received about $5.7 million through that program as this one-time funding. And then also there's a zero emission transit capital program component. And so as you know, state policy, state of California is heavily invested in advancing electrification of transit fleets and electrification in vehicles overall. And so this is an exciting shot in the arm to help transit agencies transition to electric. And this region is well on its way. The TTD already has 3 heavy-duty electric vehicles with a heavy-duty charging station at Lake Tahoe Community College. So some of those pieces are beginning to come into play. The eligible activities for this, like I said, are transit capital. So you can buy rolling stock buses, you can invest in maintenance facilities, and then from a limited perspective in operations. So the fact that this is limited term funding, strategically, we're not really looking to broadly expand operations that you then don't have a sustainable funding source to maintain. That wouldn't do justice to the riding public. But we're trying to be strategic here, as you'll see in the list next. Eligible entities. So as Kira said, the Transportation Development Act, you saw TART and TTD being those primary recipients of that funding. Currently, they are the only eligible applicants or claimants for that funding. This program is run through the TDA statutes, so we actually have to follow a lot of the TDA administrative rules. And TTD and TART are the only eligible entities for this funding. And so we worked with both operators to develop a project list that was based on a lot of their near-term conversations with their boards and their capital and operating needs going forward. And so there's also a lot of administration. I put this last bullet in. TRPA is going to be receiving, and you'll see on the list, a bit of funding, but it's pretty heavy duty reporting. We're going to be doing monthly reporting on ridership and a lot of operational characteristics. And the state of California just formed a 22-member transit advisory board to try and look longer term at how the state can support transit. And so a lot of this information that we're going to be providing is really telling the Tahoe story about transit and helping inform that group about the rural nature of transit and why it's so critical in Tahoe. Because I think a lot of the rural transit operators kind of get overlooked by a lot of transit policy in California. So this is an opportunity for us to kind of put our hand up, to include our data, and to kind of make our case. So next page. So this is the recommendation of the program or projects going through. So this funding, it's kind of a tight turnaround here. We got the guidelines for this funding actually mid-September, so less than like a month and a half ago. And so we worked closely with the operators to put together a list, again, that was based on a lot of their planning work and recent discussions. And so the exciting thing here is that you'll see a trend of, just like the TDA conversation we just had, of supporting emerging services like microtransit, both on the north end of the lake and South Shore. And that's exciting. We've seen that service growing and having a broader constituency of partners. And so I would classify these projects as kind of buckets of funding. There's still a lot of details to work out in terms of the specifics of, you know, charging infrastructure, locations, the level of like vehicle procurement and how many vehicles we can actually get that are electrified. And so this is giving you a flavor of where the investments are targeted that we need to submit to the state. And the state is being extremely flexible because of not only the turnaround time in this program, but the evolution of a lot of transit agencies just getting into electrification of their fleets, exploring other service models and other service types. So the state is extremely flexible, which is good for our case, where there's still some details to work out around charging infrastructure, vehicle procurements that we're going to be doing over the next coming months. And so just quickly, there's a couple of regional elements that I wanted to speak to. The first one being a comprehensive operational analysis. And in transit jargon, this COA is really a data, surveys, and analysis that's actually been found to be pretty critical in supporting grant application, service planning, and others that will help that TIRCP application for the Tahoe Transportation District. That's going to help TART do some service planning as they look to try to look at how they operate that microtransit service most efficiently. So it's a very powerful analysis tool that both operators and TRPA are excited to get going on. And then you see the TRPA administration. It's probably doesn't cover the amount of effort that we're going to be exercising on monthly reporting. However, at least there's something there for TRPA administration because it's pretty significant data provision to the state. And then you see these kind of buckets where we're looking at purchasing microtransit vans to start to drive down, whether it's a contracted operator, start to drive down that contract cost, or even longer term, looking at internalizing some of those operations in the region. And then you have obviously charging infrastructure for both north and south ends of the lake and transit operations. And again, the details of exactly where those charging facilities are, we're still working on that and trying to couple it with, like on the South Shore, TTD is working on their fleet electrification plan. The city and the South Shore TMA have been talking a lot about electrifying the microtransit fleet and where to locate charging for that fleet. So it's good timing to be having those conversations. And then the bottom one here is reserving some operations funding for microtransit on the South Shore and to make sure that we're continuing to support the proliferation of that service in South Lake Tahoe. So this is our proposal. We are required, next slide. So just from a timing standpoint, this again is one that has to move. We have to submit by December 31st to the California State Transportation Agency, or CalSTA, this program of projects. It's very flexible. We can amend that, modify that as these discussions continue. But then this is only for 1 year of funding. So we're going to be going back to you next year, hopefully sooner. This was kind of a quick turn for everyone. But I'm hoping that we can get in front of you earlier next cycle. And so we'll have one more year of funding through this budget act for next year. And so we'll be doing this same exercise late next calendar year. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And this is so exciting because speaking to Placer, who has been an amazing partner with microtransit, they didn't know that if they could go out for procurement of the vehicles, and this is allowing that. them to do that. So I commend the team. I know it took a lot of effort and regional effort to make this happen. And I think this is going to be a game changer because we are paying too much for microtransit right now. So we need our own vehicles. But I look to the board. Yes, Vice Chair Friedrich.
Thank you, Chair Hill. John Friedrich for the record. So similar to the last question, I just want to kind of make sure we're all thinking the same thing on the flexibility. These are the buckets for the application, but say the 3 million for TTD, for microtransit, vehicle procurement, infrastructure. There's some flexibility on the ultimate recipient of that, right? Or is that the case? It could ultimately flow through, say, to SSTMA or to the city to purchase vehicles. I mean, just wanted to make sure that that's still fluid and kind of the ultimate recipient is not already pre-programmed.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the actual recipient of the funding, that has to be TTD. And so whether that's a purchase by TTD and then, you know, agreements and other things to be used for microtransit can be in place. So there's a lot of opportunities to get those into service for microtransit. But we will have to see if there's any kind of sub-recipient opportunity, because as we're reading the guidelines, those eligible entities need to be the ones receiving the funding from TRPA. And so that can all be worked out, I think, through operating agreements and other things. And so, yeah, I think the intent here is clearly to buy that type of rolling stock vans for microtransit on the South Shore.
Right, and John Friedrich again. Yeah, so there isn't a current plan to have a separate like microtransit operation
No,
from SSTMA, right?
not at this time.
And
Right.
I see that Mr. Hasty is here and he may be able to just clear this up a bit because there's a lot of work being done, and I heard you may be going on to TTD, so you'll find out about all this in detail, but maybe you could give a summary about what we're doing with the South Shore.
Morning, Carl Hasty, District Manager for the Tahoe Transportation District. Yes, so Mr. Friedrich, we're looking at this for a couple of reasons. One of the big issues that we're trying to hammer out right now to make sure that the TDA funds that you asked about earlier can go to the existing transit. And for the committee as a whole, we have been working to integrate the microtransit service at South Shore with what TTD runs. And so that includes some of this on the funding side. Paratransit service is critical to this. That's what's the ability for microtransit to take on paratransit is what will allow those TDA funds to shift. The idea here with the vans is also contemplating that because there's also a couple of ways this can go. One is entirely through the microtransit. The other is to optimize the use of paratransit service today to also act like microtransit. So this is exactly what we're in discussions with right now. There's flexibility as far as the district is concerned of just working out something that will work for everybody. So that's how we plan on using these kind of assets together with the microtransit service to make that integration all the more possible.
Good. Again, John Friedrich for the record. Thank you, Mr. Hasty, and look forward to serving on the board. And
Well,
yeah, so so what we're saying is, and it's great that we have these funds available, right, to electrify fleets and expand them. So we're saying of the 3 million that we have available, that is still able to be there are ongoing conversations with SSTMA, the city, and others about how ultimately those funds are programmed within those buckets to meet these objectives, right?
Yes, because how we're looking at this is additional resources to make that integrated network operate. And that's what we're all working towards. So I just don't have the final details for you yet, but that's how we're looking at this and making all of these resources to be able to provide the system that we are all looking for here at South Shore.
And he's being careful because the board hasn't made a decision. And so you're coming on at an exciting time because we will be discussing that pretty much all of next year. That will be the main thing that we'll be working on.
Including how to program these funds, you're saying?
The relationship between TTD and the city and the TMA. And so there's like a lot of big discussions that will be they're all being queued up for next year. So, but in the meantime, TTD is the only organization that can procure these today.
To receive the funds or to procure the vehicles and
receive the
infrastructure
funds.
with the funds?
Yes, receive the funds.
Receive the funds. And then like which entity ultimately uses the funds to procure charging stations and make ready infrastructure and vehicles is still flexible and being discussed and will come out of this?
Yes, and this is part of what's trying to come together here because there are a lot of moving parts that we're trying to line up collectively. And that includes the other funds that are available to microtransit. So consequently, we can optimize everything in order to provide the coverage that folks are wanting to see. And so I'm just going to say that one more time. To that end, we're looking at this as being flexible.
Any other board members? I'm not seeing any. Okay, then we will open it to public comment. Any people in the room who would like to comment on this item? Welcome.
Good morning, Gavin Feiger, League to Save Lake Tahoe. Talking today from our seat on the SSTMA South Shore Transportation Management Association board. Bolt Darcy, my boss and I sit on that board. And we joined it a few years back with one of the main goals being to develop microtransit on the South Shore. We'd supported microtransit on the North Shore and even brought a pilot to South Lake back in like 2017, 18. So following up on that commitment, we sit here today with the city as a great partner and TTD is building up as a partner too to expand and electrify the service all over the South Shore. May have seen in the news, but thanks to Douglas County and the city's match funds, we are expanding the service in mid-January. And we've been working really closely with the city to get chargers so we can start we lease vehicles right now. So start leasing electric vehicles. We've got a grant from TRPA, thank you, for an overnight charger, be 24/7 solar power. It's got a solar canopy and a battery for overnight charging of one or two of our leased when we start leasing the electric vehicles. Working with TTD on a potential in-route charger at the community college, which will help with that. And then we're also looking at other grant opportunities for charging. So that's all to say that this will be a huge help to our efforts to expand and electrify microtransit on the South Shore. And really looking forward to figuring out Raymond, our part-time staff person on the TMA, has been working closely with Carl and his team. So there's some different models out there of, ownership and maintenance. And we have a third party operating the system right now, the microtransit. So that it's all these kind of moving pieces, but we're confident that it'll work out and we'll have more vehicles and some electric ones on the road next summer. Thanks for the funding and keeping pushing this forward.
Thank you.
Good morning, Ellie Waller. I wasn't going to comment on this, but I did want to bring up microtransit as related to the South Shore. Douglas County often gets left out in the service zones right now with the, I guess, pilot program from the South Shore TMA. And I think transportation management, we have to make sure we're not talking in acronyms. A lot of it's going around today. I go to a lot of meetings. I understand them, but just for reference for all the committees. But I do appreciate that we do now have a board of commissioner on the South Shore Transportation Management Group, Charlotte Hales, and she is participating. And I do go to lots of meetings. Lots of the funding is coming from Douglas County and we're not getting fair share service. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will work on that acronym input. Very good. Any other folks in the room? And then anyone online?
Madam Chair, we have 2 hands raised online.
Thank you.
Ann Nichols, if you are able to unmute, you can address the committee. And I see that you are unmuted, but it doesn't look like your microphone is picking you up. We'll circle back. The other hand raise is Marta Michelizzi. Marta, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just was curious. There's a lot of push for electric vehicles, I'm hearing, and I'm just curious if there's any data on the efficiency and performance of these electric vehicles in an area such as Tahoe with a lot of cold weather and a lot of cold weather months. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public commenters?
Yes, let's try to get Anne on. And your other profile's unmuted if you can address the committee.
Okay, can you hear me at all?
We can.
Yay, I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on. It was even hard for me to get on the Zoom. So, but thanks for trying to facilitate this. Maybe I have missed something, which I'm sure is the case, but I've never seen a financial analysis of the micro transit. I've only seen Placer County did a really nice study on who's riding it, who's using it, and how much, because you want money from the public for this. So I think that's what's missing in all this is what is the public responsibility going to be? I know that in North Shore, we provide all this transportation for ski area employees, which I think the ski areas should be paying for. I know that in Incline Village, the kids, the teenagers are calling microtransit to go to Starbucks every day. So this is, and it costs $17 per ride at least. And where is that discussion? So I would love to know where I could find that other than Placer County's good analysis. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
Madam Chair, there are no other hands raised to comment.
Okay. I know there were some questions about performance of electric vehicles, but I don't know if we really want to get into the analysis of that. Is there somewhere we could point people to look for that online?
Yeah, Nick Haven here with TRPA staff. I mean, that's a great question. I mean, obviously emerging technology. TTD has actually had a lot of experience already now running 3 heavy duty EV buses. And they have acknowledged that it doesn't work necessarily everywhere. And so full electrification is probably not likely in the near term just because of topography and other access requirements, and then coupling that with what EV vehicles are even available at this time. And so I think both operators, TART and TDD, are methodically looking into this and investigating. And there's a lot of literature out there on the heavy duty EV side. I don't have any resources off the top of my head. However, I can assure you that the 2 operators are definitely being very methodical about approaching electrification and knowing that that's a transition over time.
Thank you. And then there was a question about the performance, I think, of the South Shore microtransit, because Placer also covers Washoe County. And I will say to Ms. Nichols, that $17 per ride will reduce when we own our own vehicles. It's going to be dramatically less costly. But I don't know if there's metrics that the South Shore TMA provides that can be looked up on a website.
Yeah, I'm not sure how, if it's on a website, but I know the South Shore TMA produces very similar data.
Okay.
In terms of, because it's actually the same operator.
Right.
And so they produce, a lot of data on their service, and that should be available on request with the South Shore
TMA. Okay, wonderful. All right, with that, yes, Vice Chair Friedrich.
Thank you, Chair Hill. John Friedrich for the record. Yeah, I would just say Ms. Nichols on the question of efficacy that, of course, Lake Tahoe Unified School District also been operating electric school buses here in various topography, various routes without incident that I can tell. Their medium and heavy duty vehicles are being placed into service all over the U.S., including in in mountain communities at high elevation throughout Colorado and California. I personally have had an EV here since 2014 with 0 incidents. And as we can see on our roads, every day we're seeing more and more light duty, medium duty, heavy duty vehicles on our roads. And you know, occasionally with us with light duty vehicles, there's some snow clearance issues where people are making poor choices that we've seen. But I mean, in my experience, and I do this professionally as well, that the only real issue is there can be some diminished, slightly lower battery capacity in cold weather. So you just have to account for that in your route cycles. But usually the overall battery capacity is sufficient to meet that route and recharge between routes, just compensate for that a bit. But in terms of performance, you know, these vehicles have, you know, dual motor or all-wheel drive, so they perform just like any other all-wheel drive vehicle. So there's really, and you know, strong torque, you know, so I haven't seen any issues, not concerned about those issues. And there is a lot of funding right now. We talk about the benefit of going into an ownership model. I mean, the California HVIP, to use an acronym, but program provides incentives for these very kinds of vans, 50 or 60,000 for one that's available now, a 14-seater, for example. So there's a lot of economic benefit to making the transition and pairing these kind of grants with other incentives that are out there. So.
Absolutely. Any other committee comments? Well, great work from the team. So at this point, I will entertain a motion on this item in order for the motion to pass. Affirmative vote of the majority of the quorum is required. And the motion is on the screen.
I'll make it.
Thank you.
John Friedrich, for the record, a move to recommend the TRPA Governing Board adopt Attachment A, Resolution 2023 approving the allocation of fiscal year 2023-24 California Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program and Zero Emission Transit Capital Program funding.
Thank you. Any questions on the motion from the board, the committee? I'm not seeing any, and we would like a roll call vote. Thank you.
Mr. Aguilar, Mr. Friedrich,
Yes.
Mr. Honigman,
Yes.
Ms. Hill.
Yes.
Madam Chair, that motion passes.
Thank you very much. Very exciting. So the next item is upcoming topics, and this is informational only. So Mr. Haven, can you please present?
Yeah, I'll let Michelle present it. You did see this slide earlier, so we're just kind of going back, but would also like to entertain any things that the committee maybe would like to see. But Michelle, why don't you go ahead and.
Yeah, I think we're going to add that one item that Commissioner Hill
Thank you.
suggested. And as you can see, there's a lot going on. But yeah, we'd like to open it up to you at this time.
Okay. Any board members want to add anything or have questions about this agenda coming up for us in the year? Okay. Not seeing any. We will now, this is informational. Do we vote on this? No. Do I have to do public comment? All right. Then we will go on to item, the committee, item 8, committee member comments. Are there any committee member comments? Not seeing any online. Not hearing any. Okay. And now we will go to our final public comment of today's meeting, public interest comments. If any member of the public wishes to address the Tahoe or the Transportation Committee, please raise your hand now, either by clicking the raise hand button on the bottom of your Zoom screen or dialing *9 on your phone. But I'd like to start with the room. Come on up.
Good morning again, Ellie Waller, Douglas County resident. I'm not sure exactly where to bring this up, but in 2017, and this is in not your packet, but another packet, the director of the Nevada Department of Conservation and Natural Resources and the Secretary of California Natural Resources convened the bi-state consultation for transportation. I'm looking forward to the reinitiation. I don't think we've heard from them since 2022. I'm sure they will be coming before or should come before this committee, as well as maybe the regional plan committee, or the entire governing board. There is a process going through, which will be mentioned at the next committee, the 777 funding framework. My general concerns as a member of the public, asking each of the local jurisdictions to pony up 7 million a year for 20 years to help this transportation issues and have a better process here for transportation for visitors as well as residents. In budget planning, they need to know in advance if the pursuit of this is legislated. I live in Douglas County. I attend their meetings. We have lots of backlog maintenance just for the locals in transportation and roads. So I'm looking forward to seeing the consultation come forward and there be lots of discussion at the local jurisdiction level as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other folks in the room? Yes, Mr. Hasty.
Carl Hasty, District Manager for the Tahoe Transportation District, and I just wanted to welcome the committee to the arcane world of transportation. We are here to help and looking forward to working with you all on this as your bi-state partner. We have the luxury of focusing exclusively on transportation, and we have a lot of crossover, as you probably already know, with membership of the board between the two boards. So I'm hoping we will be talking more as we move into the spring and talking about what we need to do moving forward. 2024 will be the 50th anniversary of public transit beginning at Lake Tahoe. And that's a good time to look back and a good time to look forward. So just wanted to say again, thank you and welcome.
Thank you. And Ms. Gustafson, who is not on the committee, would like to make a public comment.
Thank you, members of the committee. And I just wanted to, on your very first item this morning, encourage the committee to potentially get presentations from each of the jurisdictions. There is so much information happening between the TMAs and the transit operations. We've expanded micromass transit to make up for the shortage of bus drivers. And I think these are all important discussions for the committee to better understand, because there are so many different partners delivering services. And by way of one of the public comments on the ski areas, and that is who's funding the TOT and TBID. They are the majority funders for those projects that we're using for micromass transit. Over $4.5 million just allocated by the Board of Supervisors yesterday to additional transportation projects and programs, and that's coming from TOT and TBID funding. So those major employers and businesses are the ones driving a lot of the general fund contributions. So I think it's important to kind of understand how each of those jurisdictions are actually already exceeding the private share of the 777. So
great point.
Thank you.
Thank you. And same thing with the North Shore. I would, the North Lake Tahoe Tourism Board supports this, as well as the RSCBA, our microtransit, as well as Washoe County. But I welcome IVGID funding because they also run a ski resort. So I can't wait to have that discussion with them. Great point by the public commenter. Any other public comments online?
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised online.
Okay, great. So is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you. We are adjourned.